Hi everyone, it's Andrea again with Thoughtful Revisions, Professional Revisions, and I'll be talking about Nancy Summers' influential study and revision strategies that you can use for anything you write. Let's begin with what strategies of revision looked like before Nancy Summers did her study. Before that, writing was thought of as exactly the same process as speech, that is, as a linear process. So you move from conception or idea to incubating that idea to writing about it. That was James Britton who thought of that. There was also James Corbett who thought of it as conception, incubation, production. You can see this straight line going through there. Summers' study showed, on the other hand, that writing and speech are very different processes. That is, writing is recursive, not linear, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So if you want an example of linear writing, it would be moving from draft to revision to the essay or the written product, once again in a straight line. The reason I have think typewriters at the end of this is because before computers, this is, in essence, well, it seemed on the surface like the process. So when I was in my first year of undergraduate, I had a typewriter. We didn't have access to computers then. And so we spent an awful lot of time writing down quotations and taking notes and figuring out, using paper and ink, the gist of what we wanted to write in our essay. Well, then I would move to the typewriter and I would bang out a draft. And at the end of that draft would be the kernel of what I wanted to say in the essay. So essentially what I do is rip the draft out of the typewriter, put it to one side, start over again at the top of the page, and boom, there's the final written product. Computers are much easier to work with because when you're just typing, you don't have the chance to go back and change a word unless you want to white it out or change the paper. And once you have an entire page written, you often don't want to go back and move things around. If you look at authors' typescripts of manuscripts, you will see that they have to insert with a pen quite often where they want to make revisions, where they want to incorporate new material, where they want to cross it out and move it to. It looks very messy and it looks very complicated, but it shows that Summers is indeed right, that writing is not a straight line, that it's recursive when we dig down and look into it. So we may actually use writing to discover. We may write a draft to figure out what we're trying to say. We may discover more while we're revising that draft. We may think some more, write some more, think while writing, stop, throw it all out, start over again. It's a very recursive process. It's writing, reflecting, revising, reflecting, repeating in any particular given order that works for you. And revision, as she showed, was a major part of writing. Here's what Summers' experiment looked like. She took 20 first-year students from 2 different universities, and she got hold of 20 experienced professional adult writers, as she called them. They weren't students, they were professionals. They were journalists or editors or academics. Each of these 40 writers wrote 3 different kinds of essays. They rewrote each essay twice, and they also read other anonymous essays, and they made suggestions on those essays for revisions. So Summers is studying 3 different types of essays written by 2 groups of authors. She's studying their revisions of each of those essays, and she's also studying their suggestions for another author made by these 2 different groups. Going through her methods a little bit, she counted and categorized changes, and the revision operations that she was categorizing included deletion, substitution, addition, and reordering. The levels of change that she also looked for were at the level of the word, the phrase, the sentence, or the theme. And she defined theme as the extended statement of one idea. Here are some examples of how those first-year student writers defined rewriting and revision. All examples are taken from summer studies. One student said, "I read what I have written, and I cross out a word, and I put another word in." A second one said, "Just using better words and eliminating words that are not needed." And a third one said, "I don't use the word rewriting because I only write one draft, and the changes that I make are made on top of the draft. The changes that I make are usually just marking out words and putting different ones in." You may notice a pattern here, that revisions are really only done at the level of the word. What Summers concluded about student writers is that their primary concern is vocabulary, and they understand revision simply as replacing words here and there. For them, writing is not an act of discovery. For them, a written test exists in the head, and it can be transferred somehow intact to the page. According to Summers, revision was not seen by student writers as an activity in which writers modify and develop perspectives and ideas. She also noted that student writers, the major changes they made are only to the first paragraph of their essays. Let's move on to those experienced professional writers' definitions of rewriting and revision, once again taken from Summers' studies. The first one said, "It is a matter of looking at the kernel of what I have written, the content, and then thinking about it, responding to it, making decisions, and actually restructuring it." A second one said, "I rewrite as I write. It is hard to tell what is a first draft because it is not determined by time. In one draft, I might cross out 3 pages, write 2, cross out a 4th, rewrite it, and call it a draft. I can only conceptualize so much in my first draft." Did you notice the change in thinking about revision between those first-year writers and these experienced professional writers? At this moment, stop and think about your own revision processes. What are they, and what level are you working at? Do you think about revision as just vocabulary and maybe changing a sentence or two? Or do you actually think about the line of thinking that you're trying to create in one of those essays? Here is another experienced writer's definition, taken again from Summers. Rewriting means, on one level, finding the argument, and on another level, language changes to make the argument more effective. Most of the time, I feel as if I can go on rewriting forever. There is always one part of a piece that I can keep working on. It is always difficult to know at what point to abandon a piece of writing. That's quite true, and you notice that this writer has shifted not just from thinking about how to restructure. This writer is thinking on different levels that if you restructure the order, if you revamp your thinking, then you also have to change the language to better reflect that argument or that thinking. And let me tell you about an experience of my own, a recent one, by the way. I was asked to write a 6,000-word article about Canadian nurses' experiences during 1918 and beyond the end of the First World War. And unfortunately, when I was halfway through the article, the editor left that position with a particular magazine. It was for the Western Front Association, Stand 2. And for another year, I heard nothing about the article. Then a new editor came in and asked me if I would contribute that same article, which, by the way, was only half finished. So I went back after a year's time. I had 3 days to do it. I went back and I re-examined my article, and what I discovered was the first 1,500 words of the 3,000 I'd written were really good. They moved. They were exciting. They really told the nurses' stories through their own words very well indeed. The last half, I threw out. Literally, I cut it in half and I threw it out. And the reason I did it was because it was boring. I had moved into statistics and citations and facts, and I had moved away from the nurses' voices and their experiences. So the last half of that didn't work. So I just cut it, deleted it from the file. Of course, I always save a copy of the original, and started over again at that point, did the research, added 4,500 words to that first 1,500, remembering to maintain the momentum of events and the nurses' voices. It turned out to be a really good, tight article. I was quite pleased with it. I did indeed manage to write it over a weekend and get it in, and it's now published. That's what I consider to be sacrifice, but at the same time, it's for the betterment of writing. When you can simply do that, look at your work and gauge it and say, this part works, this part does not, let's ditch it and start again. And we see yet a third experienced writer redefine revision, more along the lines of what I was just talking about. It means taking apart what I have written and putting it back together again. I ask major theoretical questions of my ideas, respond to those questions, and think of proportion and structure, and try to find a controlling metaphor. I find out which ideas can be developed and which should be dropped. I am constantly chiseling and changing as I revise. So once again, we see someone who is not satisfied with the first iteration of an idea, who goes back to question, to realign, to restructure, to better the thinking in the essay itself. And in doing that, carving out what works and what doesn't, and also changing the language, not necessarily at the same time, but at that different level. So once again, I would ask you to pause the video at this point and think about the difference between Summer's inexperienced writers, those first-year students, and the experienced writers, the professionals, both how they define rewriting and revision, and the actual strategies they use to go about it. And then think about what you do and what you could learn from what you've just heard. Then come back and turn the video on again. To continue, for experienced writers, the primary objectives of revision and rewriting from Summers were to find the form or shape of the content, design, or argument. And so they knew that that first draft, or whatever they conceived of as a first draft, wouldn't necessarily capture that shape of the content, the design, or the argument. Secondly, it was to imagine the reader and shape the written product for them. And thirdly, it was to discover meaning through writing and rewriting. And that's essential. Those are 3 really good points to take with you and think about whenever you revise a paper. You've probably already realized the major differences between those student writers and the experienced writers, but I'll point them out anyway. Summer's students, those she studied, worked only at the word and sometimes the sentence level, whereas her experienced writers worked at all levels. First, they uncovered the shape of the whole essay, and then they attended to details such as language. And they also used writing to discover their thoughts and the design of the essay. Note that the experienced writers, most of them did not try to attend to everything at once. They would start trying to uncover the shape of the essay, the line of thinking that they wanted to follow. Then they would attend to the language, the sentence structure, the vocabulary. Some strategies for you to try when you are revising your essay draft before you hand it in. The first thing to do is work on your thinking first. One of the ways that you can do this is to do a reverse outline where you write a word or a couple of words or a short phrase that describes the content of each paragraph in the margin. And you then follow that through to see how everything flows together. So you consider your exploration and thinking work first, especially for this essay, your thought reflection. How can you deepen that thinking or complicate it or add to it? You also want to think about what doesn't belong there. No matter how good it is, sometimes you just have to cut. You also have to ask if the order is working. So if you've done that reverse outline where you write those words or phrases in the margin, take a look at them and ask yourself, why have you written in this order? Can you move a section somewhere else to have it work better? Noting that if you do move a section, you're going to have to change the transitions around that section. Thirdly, consider your reader. How might you explain what you want to show us better? Would it work if you added another scene or another source or something else with more thought and reflection? Consider us and don't make us work. When you work at the next level, once you are satisfied with the structure and the organization and the shape and the overall flow of your essay, then you can move to the level of vocabulary and grammar. And I also find it a helpful strategy to make a list of the mistakes that you have a habit of making. In my case, that is typing the word files instead of fields and circulars instead of circles. Put those regular patterns of errors, hang them up near your computer somewhere. It's often easy to search for them and to take them out straight away. So you want to consider your vocabulary carefully, you want to consider grammar carefully, and you want to consider the shape of your sentences carefully. Before you hand in any work at all, you should always spell check it and you should always proofread it. That means read it slowly and carefully, preferably out loud so that you are reading every word on the page and finding the ones that you've missed or the ones that don't work. Read from beginning to end to catch small errors that distract us from your thinking. I hope you practice some of these strategies for revising your essay and learn to write and rewrite and revise like an experienced professional writer. Take some of these strategies with you and try them out. In the meantime, thanks for listening. This is Andrea signing off.